Thank you for joining us and finding out in the world of video games. And, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and now for many of the classic Halo Xbox 360 experiences, it's the end of times. If you weren't aware, Microsoft announced they were going to be sunsetting pretty much all of the multiplayer online aspects of the entire Halo series on the original Xbox 360. Now, while it's true that almost all of those games live on either in part or in whole through the updated versions that are in the Master Chief Collection on Xbox One, I still can't help but feel a certain wistfulness as the final dawn approaches for these titles that at one point defined an entire era of my console experience. I mean, the very first game I ever bought for an Xbox console was the original Halo, and pretty much my entire library of games that were at least remained static in my library for the entire Xbox 360 generation had Halo in the title somewhere within it.
Same.
Now Microsoft is finally sending these Xbox 360 services off into that good night for the final time. And while the actual enjoyability of each of these releases varied, they also represent some of my fondest gaming memories. Now, spoilers are going to follow here, just in case you somehow missed the memo that most of these games came out at about 10 years.
But for real, which one was a game changer for you? Of all of them. Because for me, it was unique, rain-soaked, soft, jazz-inspired tones of Halo 3 ODST, complete with a protagonist that somehow had less to say than the ever stoic Master Chief, which is, kind of interesting.
Yeah, he doesn't usually have much to say at all. But
I know.
But this guy
How
said
could
nothing.
he have literally less?
Literally.
Literally nothing. And Firefight, I seriously loved Firefight. That was seriously my all-time favorite.
Now, for me, it was more of the evergreen excellence that was Halo 3. And for many, that remains, to this day, the gold standard in the Halo saga. And who will remember that moment in Halo Reach when it truly started dawning on you that you're not going to escape this mission alive? As each member of the Noble team fell, it became harder and harder to move forward. Not just because the game got more difficult, because you knew each remaining level was going to call a member of your squad's number for the final time. Or, maybe it was that incredible part of Halo 4 that... Well,
yeah, I was going to say.
There had to be something memorable.
There was nothing good.
One. I know
I didn't...
Cortana was in it at one point. And there was some... It's not coming to mind right now. I'm sure there's a good part in there somewhere. Maybe we'll just leave Halo 4 right where it is and get back on point.
Okay, the point is that for many people, there were some unforgettable moments captured in each of these games. And I know for me personally, there were some shared online experiences that remain some of my favorite all-time gaming moments. And as the lights flicker off on these services for the final time, I think it is appropriate to recognize each of these games, flaws and all, Halo 4 looking at you, for the incredible achievements that they were at the time.
Well, think about it. With the slightly underwhelming launch of Halo 5 Guardians, and it very clearly demonstrated it is not easy to follow in the footsteps of these juggernaut releases that have come before. And for years, these games have continued to provide entertainment, comfort, and solace to the dedicated gamers out there who have continued to finish the fight all these years. But now, it's time to say those final goodbyes.
The funny thing about moving forward is that most of the time we're referring to moving on from something, negative that happened into our lives.
Halo 4.
I was going to say that's more of a traumatic experience. Maybe even a disappointing one.
Yes.
But anyway, we would prefer to leave, all those in the past.
Yes, definitely.
Now, there is an entire genre of self-help books designed to assist us with moving on after loss, or pain, or hurt, or even heartbreak.
Or Halo 4.
And is there a book on that? Maybe
well,
you should write one.
Moving on from Halo 4, it'll be about one page.
Don't play. Look at that. That wasn't scripted. And it is definitely critical that we do so. We want to just keep swimming through the hardest and most challenging moments of life. But sometimes we fail to recognize that it is equally important to move forward from positive situations and happy memories as well.
Certainly. As nice as it would be to simply bask in every remaining Halo sunrise in perpetuity, the truth is that we must be prepared to move forward through the best of times, not just the worst. Let's be honest. moving forward from a comfortable spot can be almost as annoying as remaining in an uncomfortable spot. Now, you might say, oh, that sounds crazy. Well, don't say that. But if you did, let me just ask you a question, okay? Have you ever gotten comfortable on the couch after a long day of work? Maybe got yourself, a little bowl of snacks, something to drink, you cuddled up with someone, or maybe you just bundled up with a blanket or something if you don't have a someone. And then you realized in that horrible moment that the remote for the TV is all the way on the other side.
Or you have a screaming baby.
Who's also on the other side of the room?
Yes.
Does she have the remote?
Yes,
she usually does.
Could. She really does. She really does. Now, be truly honest, though. Did you decide to just keep watching whatever was already on the TV because you just didn't want to disrupt your coziness? I mean, you just got comfortable. The blanket is even covering your toes just right.
Because your wife hasn't pulled it off yet. Oh, that just got real. Never mind. I wasn't supposed to.
But regardless, in that moment, when a pet cuddles up in your lap and you realize you are now going to have to stay right where you are for the rest of all time, or your baby cuddles up in your lap, that too. It's that comfortable place that we wish would seriously just never end. And if we were given the choice, they probably never would.
And an excellent example of this is the shepherd boy who became a king. A young lad, maybe I must mention him previously, named David. You're probably fairly familiar with him. When we start his story in 1 Samuel 16, we find that David was off taking care of business, and he literally was not even invited to the party that was going to change his life that day. In 1 Samuel 16, verses 10 through 13, we have the setting where Samuel came as the prophet of God. He had been the leader and the judge of the people all that time. But the people of Israel were not satisfied with that arrangement. They wanted a king, because all the other countries around them had a king. And after multiple warnings that this was a terrible idea, God acquiesced to their desires and gave them their first king, who was Saul. Now, that wasn't really working out very well for them.
So Samuel was sent to look for the next king of Israel. And he landed at the home of Jesse, who had 8 sons. 8. My aunt has 8 kids, okay? Can't even imagine 8 sons, okay? Jesse only brought his eldest 7 to meet the prophet, but it was his youngest son, which was David, who would be chosen, even though it would be many, many, many years until the crown actually landed on his head.
Absolutely, but here's the interesting thing. When we think about it, David wasn't just out there chilling with the sheep until the time that his number was called to go face down Goliath. Okay, tending sheep was only David's part-time job. You may not have known that. He also had a full-time job as the armor bearer to the king, the aforementioned King Saul, to be precise. You see that in 1 Samuel 16, 18 through 21, when Saul had sent to find someone who could play the harp for him. And this person said, I've seen the son of Jesse, Bethlehemite, skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor. Kind of disrupts your whole shepherd boy story, doesn't it? A man of war, prudent in speech, a handsome person. The Lord is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David, who's with the sheep. And David came to Saul, stood before him. Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And I said, what about this part-time gig? All right, 1 Samuel 17:15 says, David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. That is before the David and Goliath confrontation. Okay?
He got a lot of jobs.
He had a lot
He's
going on.
got a lot going on.
Well,
He does.
And kids got to make a living, I guess. So let's cut to the chase. David was not the mere little shepherd boy that you may have imagined all this time, who came and fought a giant and became famous for it. He already had a pretty high-profile gig. He was the armor bearer for the king. Okay? He was a harpist for the king. So he was a famed musician in the palace, all right? And then, on top of those two things, he would go back home and tend the sheep part-time, just to, I guess, make ends meet. This guy was juggling 3 jobs. And during that, he was still somehow finding the time, and you see this in 1 Samuel 17:36 through 37, found the time to kill a lion and a bear who was attacking his herd. So with all this going on, David was in proximity to his future. He was literally right next to the king. And he was showing some flashes of his capability, but he still was not inhabiting his destiny. not yet.
Now, it would have been easy for David to be satisfied with the level of success that he had already experienced. As the youngest son of his father, he was already punching well above his height class with his two, just one, but two high.
Weight class.
Oops.
I'll just start.
Now, it would have been easy for David to be satisfied with the level of success that he had already experienced. As the youngest son of his father, he was already punching well above his weight class, with his two, not one, but two high-profile gigs working for the king, as well as his pro wrestling career with dangerous animals on the side. But David had an anointing, a divine call on his life that would not allow him to rest comfortably in the shadow of the throne that he was destined to occupy.
Now, when Goliath finally did come to town, where most people think David's story started, David's collision course with his true purpose finally revealed itself, but only because David made the choice to refuse to watch this from the sidelines and become involved. When Goliath did not come to town calling David's name and picking a fight with him. Once again, David had to invite himself to that party as well. You see that in 1 Samuel 17, verses 32 through 37. And when he was talking about his credentials for this fight, and he was explaining it to Saul, this is where we get the part about the lion and the bear. David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. It's another gig that I run part-time when I'm not working for you. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out, struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it came against me, caught it by its beard, struck and killed it. Your servant killed the lion, I killed the bear, and this Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God.
He's really selling himself good here.
Well, he does have a pretty good resume. Just keeping it real here, I'd be pretty proud of myself if I accomplished just one of the things in my entire life.
Yeah.
On David's amazing list of accomplishments before he had even really started his. Can you play the harp?
No.
What about while protecting your sheep from a lion? I feel like that would be an interesting audience right there.
It's nuts.
I wonder if he took a break in the middle of the song, or if he was just like, well, I don't want to disrupt the sheep. I don't know. Not sure. I don't harp. So I don't know if you...
I don't harp.
It's not a thing.
I don't harp.
But after all he had already done, David was still not prepared to get comfortable in any of these roles or with any of his achievements, as incredible as each of them have obviously been, because as long as he was still living, he was still moving forward towards the crown that Samuel had anointed him for all the way back at the beginning before he had any of these jobs.
Now, whatever this year has meant to you, or last year, since we're in a new year now, the truth is that it is time for all of us to move forward. Some of us have some negative stuff that we really need to leave in the past and simply place it on the foot of his cross and just leave it there, walk away. But we all must also graduate into what is next for us. And that means not only moving on from the pain and misery of the negative, but also saying a fond farewell to those comfortable spots that will only hold us back from the next step in our destiny. We were never meant to stop growing, to stop moving forward, to stop advancing. Every sunset is beautiful and deserves to be appreciated for all that is represented. But each new day represents not only opportunity, but an expectation that we rise to what the Lord has next for us.
Just like David, we are all chasing a crown, and this is not a passive race. If anyone had earned the right to take a pit stop and enjoy the fruits of their labor, it would be one of my favorite people to mention. It's the Apostle Paul. But in 1 Corinthians 9, 24 and 25, even Paul reminds us that as long as we are still down here, we are still running. Continuing to dwell in and on our past, whether it was pleasant or traumatic, is simply not an option when there's still so much left to do. Much like all of my happy and maybe some not so happy adventures through the Halo franchise on the Xbox 360, moving forward is simply part of the curriculum. And the Lord, in his infinite wisdom, lovingly places his hand on our back and presses us forward. Not only from those times that try the soul, and goodness knows this last year's had plenty of them, but also from some of the happy times that maybe we wish would never end. So join me as we move forward towards a new dawn and the fresh adventures that await each and every one.